I teach a course called Religion and Sexuality, which I had intended to be a small seminar, but has ended up being a slightly larger course. I teach it every 2 years and enrolls between 80 and 120 students. And on the first day, I explain the themes of the course essentially as a series of of encouragements that you leave if you're uncomfortable with. So I say, I think you should probably leave if you really don't like religion. I think you should probably leave if you really, really don't like sex. And third, I think you should leave if you're going to be incredibly uncomfortable with ambiguity. And I do that both because it's a shopping period class and I want students to feel like they're getting the class that they expect, but also because, to me, the entire point of the course is to subvert the things that they normally think about those categories, imagining that religions are all awful orthodoxies that keep people from their freedom, and that sex is always a source of freedom. These are things that I want them to think about and come back to after reading a lot of material on American religious history, and particularly the way religious movements prescribe particular sexual behavior, but also the way that the broader culture has in it various sexual acts promoted, talked about, prescribed, that themselves have a kind of ritual aspect. When I was originally planning the course and thinking of it as a seminar, I did a lot of research of primary documents in American religion where there are explicit sexual prescriptions. And the person that I first researched was a man named John Humphrey Noyes, who is most famous in the broader culture for coining the term free love, but within American religious history is known as somebody who was obsessed with the idea of perfection, that human beings could be rid of sin. And he was particularly interested in the idea that he sourced in the New Testament where Jesus says that in heaven there will be no marriage. And he decided that he believed really an essential practice for all human beings would be a sort of notion of complex marriage, in which, to speak kind of abbreviated about a very complicated system, we are all essentially married to one another. And I'd always known about John Humphrey Noyes. I'd always known about the Oneida Perfectionists that he led in upstate New York. But I had never understood that this revelation occurred to him while he was at Yale. And that got me to thinking as I was reading a lot of articles in the New York Times and other papers about Yale graduates and what they were doing after graduation. And I started thinking, for all the amazing things that Yale graduates do, and they do so many amazing things, I would like to hear more of them leading brigades of new sexual revolution and thinking through what kind of lives we live in this present culture as sexual beings. And what really excited me to discover this about Noyes was to imagine teaching a course that got students to think of themselves as leaders not only of politics and of economics, but also of sexual consciousness. In the course, we have a couple different kinds of assignments. The first one this semester that the students are actually writing right now is they have to write a response to a young man's memoir and polemic, a young recent graduate of Yale who wrote a book called Sex and God at Yale, where he wrote a pretty sharp critique of what he felt was a kind of excessive sexual culture among the undergraduates here, and a kind of failure of intellectual and moral discipline towards their sexual selves. And right now the students are writing, they've read some of Hardin's book, and I've invited them to write a letter to the editor about this book, not literally to send it off unless they so choose, but to try to create an argument about how they think about their sexual culture at Yale relative to Hardin's readings. Other assignments in the class include asking them to write a speech for Michelle Obama using the writings of Michel Foucault to think through about the nature of the body and how important the body is for the national politic. This is in response to Michelle Obama's Let's Move campaign. They're also going to be asked to write a nomination for a text to be used in the course, something from popular culture or from American religious history where they find a religious group and research their prescriptions for sexual action. All of these assignments show that my intention is to try to draw in students who are interested in getting an introduction to the humanities. We talk a lot in the course about basic acts of argumentation and close reading, but also to try to pull from as many disciplines as possible and to not imagine that they are coming in and must know anything in advance of the course about the history of sexuality, about the history of America, or about the history of gender. What I want them to do is to come in and think that they themselves have resources to call upon their own experiences and perceptions. And while I discourage first-person talk in class, what I encourage is using all that first-person passion about what they've perceived in their worlds to come and bear on these texts. In the class, I've had everything from football players to powerful queer activists, There's a wide array, and I think that they're brought to the course precisely because the course does not take any position other than you yourself have something to say about the discomfort you have about the sexual culture you occupy. And I've found in teaching it here that over and over again, students come to understand and be able to name what they find so structuring and limiting about American sexual culture. And I hope they then lead new rebellions about ways we could live within it. As an LGBT person myself, I'm acutely sensitive to the way that issues of sexual concern, sexual crisis, sexual politics often seem in the public sphere to be dominated by LGBT people. That the question of sexual suffering or sexual confusion seems to be largely a desire to manage the LGBT population. I've tried to design this course in a way that emphasizes its inclusivity insofar as I want to have people in the room who come in imagining themselves to be any number of sexual identities. And what I like them to come out as is not debunked of those identities, but to imagine that the boundaries of those conceptions have been designed by someone else, and that what we have to try to do is to bring our own consciousness to bear upon our experiences, and to do that with as much care and concern for the history that brings us to this present. One of my great excitements about the course is when I have a student come into my office who says that they came because they're a religious studies major and that this filled the requirements, or that they just thought it would be a fun way to fill a kind of introductory humanities credit. And that they say that over the course of the class that they came to realize how much they see in the media about LGBT people, about women's rights, are really caricatures, and caricatures invented to propound a certain form of ideal sexuality. That made them realize how much of their life was itself a kind of assignment, an assignment to be a kind of person that they didn't feel themselves to be. And even as they may go on to study something far afield from the study of religion and sexuality, they will continue to hold that inside themselves as something that guides them not only as scholars or as professionals, but also as human beings trying to fulfill their greatest purpose.